here with Simon Westbury, strategic advisor of 1xBet.
Yes, pleasure to be here. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me.
Appreciate your attention, your time. I have a couple of questions for you. I'm going to begin with you've had a front row seat to the Latin American market's growth. What's the biggest change you've noticed in how operators approach this region today?
I think a lot of operators entering the market on a global operators are still making the same mistake. They don't understand the intricacies of the continent, and the market isn't one market. It's many different countries that make up the market. And I think many operators from outside the region have come in with a one-size-fits-all strategy and struggled. Those operators that have understood the local intricacies of each market and understood that players are different in each market and adapted their products to meet the market needs have been successful. I think obviously we've seen a growth in regulation across the region. So actually, in many ways, in terms of global regulation, the continent's leading the way. I saw in a recent report that we did, One Expect Commission, that in terms of the use of technology, especially around player protection, Latin America is leading the way. So 34% of operators are using AI in their player protection tools, whereas it's 30% in Africa. And 69% are using real-time monitoring, which was the most out of Africa, Western Europe, etc. So it's been very interesting to do those reports and see Latin America move forward. I think the challenge that we're seeing in the region is regulation. Maybe we've had a honeymoon period where regulation may actually be working. But I think when this happens, regulators always push for more. I think there's a bit of confusion around taxation and regulation. And I think as an industry, globally, we've lost a discussion with society where people view gambling as bad. And I think in Latin America, gambling's still seen by many as an income source rather than an entertainment exercise. So I think there's lots of work to be done about making sure that we engage with regulators, both as operators and suppliers, to ensure that the regulation stays fit for purpose. Because otherwise, we're already seeing influencers saying that don't bet in the regulated market, it's not as good as the offshore market. And I think a regulator doesn't want that, an operator doesn't want that. But what an operator needs is an environment that's commercially viable to operate, and a player needs a safe environment to have fun. So I think we've seen lots of progress, but with progress and natural evolution, more questions come. So I think we're in the stage of maybe honeymoon period after marriage coming to an end and the hard work starting.
You have said that Latin America is leading the way. So Brazil's regulated market's taking shape as well. So my question is, how do you see that impacting established operators like 1xBet in terms of competition and compliance focus?
Yeah, I think when we talk about Brazil and 1xBet, we're a new kid on the block here. You know, we went live in November, others were live before us, and that was because we really wanted to focus on getting our product right for Brazil. You know, we have a three-pillar strategy. The first strategy is always about products, be it sportsbook and casino, making sure it's tailored to the market. The second is around digital acquisition, be that SEO, be that affiliate, be that our CRM tools, and where possible, influencers. Then we have sponsorship, and obviously that's a big topic of discussion in Brazil at the moment. But I think those are the three pillars contacted along with player protection. So I think they're the four things we focus on, and then we've made that more local to Brazil in how we approach the market. So I think the challenge of Brazil for 1xBet is actually making sure that we apply everything we've learned globally to a local market. And as is in our name, we always want to be number one. So we'll strive to be number one, but we know it's going to be a challenge in this market. And, you know, as I said before, with challenges comes evolution, and we're into the next stage of our development.
And you've often talked about localization being key in emerging markets. What does effective localization actually look like in Brazil or Latin America generally?
I mean, I think in Latin America generally, like I've mentioned it, we've got sports sponsorships across the markets we're regulated in, across different countries in the continent. We've got local influencers, so we try and appeal to the local market to build trust in brands they recognise. Obviously, we work with global brands like FC Barcelona, so that's a globally recognised brand, but we also then drill down to have local partnerships, and also we have boots on the ground, especially in Brazil. It doesn't work unless you have people on the ground, be that customer support, be that your product people. So we have very specialized advanced teams in each country that we operate. And then when we look at the product level, it's not just personalization in the grand scheme of things, it's personalized to the player and how their preferences are. So we have, and I'm not going to give credit to too many people here, we have specific casino suppliers that we only have in Brazil. We have other suppliers in Western Europe that we know don't work here, so we haven't bought them here. So it's an engagement with our player to understand our player and make sure that the product is localized and they can associate 1xBet with brands that they trust.
We hear a lot about player engagement and brand differentiation. My question is, in such a crowded field, what do you think will separate serious long-term operators from short-term entrants?
I think like we touched on that in the first question, so it's a nice denouement to come back. I think one thing I would say is those that come with a one-size-fits-all approach, it's not going to work. I think those that come in here thinking they know everything and trying to dictate to the local market, they won't succeed. I think you've got a number of very good local operators in the market in Brazil and the region. And I think those guys and those companies that come in and do something a bit different, be a little bit disruptive, offer the player, yes, what they want, but in a different way, or just don't copy and paste, they'll copy because that's short termism. I think, look, we will see consolidation in the market, in all markets in Latin America, maybe because the regulation gets more stringent, tax rises come, and then the smaller operators are going to struggle. But also, I think, every market as it grows, M&A happens and consolidation happens that way. So I think you have to come in and you have to be different. You have to understand your brand values, what you're bringing to the market, and then make sure that you live and breathe that every day.
You've said in many ways, but to finally conclude the chat, because everyone's looking at Latin America, what's the next big thing you see shaping the Latin American betting market?
I think there's many things that can be seen. We can look at the application of tools of AI and how the market evolves with that. We'll see new specific content. I think there's many avenues that we go down. I think player protection needs to be a focus because not all regulatory environments in Latin America include a player protection component. And, I'm sitting here as an operator. I don't ever advocate player protection being put in the hands of the operator. I think it needs to be at a higher regulatory level. So I think there's many challenges, but I think it sounds really boring, and I'm sure many people have said the same thing. And I don't want to just make up something to sound controversial or dynamic. I think the end of the possible regulatory honeymoon across the region, we see the tax rises in Mexico, we see the possible ban on sponsorship here. Here at the show, I've been hearing about a B2B possible license in Brazil. I think there's many questions coming on a regulatory environment that are going to shape the market going forward. And, we can only play in the market in the rules that we're given. So how those rules evolve, well, I think will impact the market. And I think it will be a case across Latin America of survival of the fittest, and that will come down to your product as always.
Simon, I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here as always. Thank you.